Why were the steel specifications altered mid-construction, Gary? I asked, tapping the corner of my monitor like I was trying to rub the laziness off it. It was 6:30 p.m. on a Wednesday, and I was the only soul left in my department. The office fluorescents had already clicked off on their own, like even they had given up. The only light came from my dual monitors and the flickering red exit sign reflecting in my cold cup of coffee. The file on my screen should have been boring. It should have screamed dull-checked boxes and rubber-stamped approvals. Instead, it whispered something different: missing material schedules, temporarily waived sections, and no backup documentation for Project 347, or any project added in the past 6 weeks. Really just a big digital shrug where due diligence was supposed to live. This wasn't a typo. It was a pattern. I should pause here to say that I didn't scream or storm into an office with a finger in the air. That's not how you last 18 years in corporate architecture. What I did do was quietly shoot a message to my direct manager, Gary, asking for an informal review of the new project files. I suggested we initiate a soft internal audit, just a light scrub. His reply was, "Let's not sound alarms. I'm sure it's just growing pains, new systems. You know how it is." "Sure, Gary. My kidney stones are just enthusiastic digestion." I dug deeper. The same 4 fields were always either blank or altered. Each time it involved a high-dollar project, recently onboarded with minimal verification. Half had addresses that traced back to P.O. boxes in Delaware or shell offices in Singapore. All signed off by Mark, the new department head who arrived 2 months ago, full of buzzwords about growth velocity and synergy. I didn't hate him, not yet. I didn't know him, but his initials sat on every questionable form like a curse. I ran my findings through our legacy architecture system, which everyone hated because it was clunky, but had one superpower. It logged everything. If someone altered a date on a form, it knew. If a signature was added out of sequence, it flagged it. I didn't even have to tell it to look for anomalies. It smelled the rot and highlighted the corpse. In a shared folder labeled Anomalies Project Streamlining, because God forbid I name it evidence of malfeasance, I began quietly collecting files, project packets, email chains, and risk analysis reports. I tagged nothing dramatic, no red alerts, just silent, cautious diligence, the kind no one notices until it's too late. I also started printing hard copies. You laugh, but if you've ever watched a data breach turn a server room into a war zone, you know paper doesn't get wiped. One night, as I organized the files chronologically, I saw it. Mark had altered the standard operating procedure, SOP, himself. 3 clicks in our system done without committee approval, flagged only by a change log. No one checks unless they're looking. The policy now read, certain due diligence criteria may be deferred at department head discretion during periods of high project volume. Legal hadn't approved that wording. Hell, legal didn't even know it was changed. I paused, just sat there in my chair, breathing in the faint, burnt smell of overheated toner and institutional betrayal. I wasn't scared, not yet, but something ancient stirred in me. That old compliance itch. The same one that saved this company from a class action suit in 2014 and a privacy breach cover-up in 2019. That instinct doesn't scream. It whispers. It whispered now. This is how it starts. The first time I met Mark, he was double-fisting cold brew and charisma like some kind of Silicon Valley missionary sent to bless us with buzzwords and dental veneers. He walked into the Monday exec meeting 10 minutes late, called the intern buddy, and opened with, "Let's talk growth velocity. Who's ready to break stuff?" I knew right then we were screwed. He wore a blazer like it owed him money and sneakers that cost more than my monthly rent. Mark was the kind of guy who spoke in LinkedIn hashtags and ended sentences with "you feel me," even when no one did. He used the word disruption to describe internal reorganizations and seamless workflows, like it was a biblical commandment, not a regulatory minefield. By Tuesday, he renamed our department Risk Flexibility Matrix. By Wednesday, he'd removed the 7-day hold on contract approvals, called it unnecessary latency. By Thursday, he was CCing the CEO on Slack threads labeled Hope's Bottlenecks. Subtle. I sent 3 memos that week. Professional, calm, data-supported. I outlined what his changes would mean for vendor accountability, flagged the missing certifications again, even suggested a half-day workshop so he could understand our baseline protocols. Not a single reply. The next week, my recurring weekly check-in was mysteriously canceled until further notice. My name started vanishing from key emails. New initiatives were being presented by people who didn't even know how to read a supplier disclosure log. When I popped into a meeting I used to lead, I got the polite version of a, "What are you doing here?" Stare. "Oh, we're good." "Thanks," smile. "Cool." I cornered Gary, my manager, outside the kitchenette. He was mid-stir in his mug of decaf when I asked, "So am I just not on these calls anymore?" He winced. "Mark's just streamlining workflows, wants to empower teams with more agility." Agility? Maybe we could cartwheel through the next audit. By Friday, I realized what this was. Not a misunderstanding, not growing pains, but a full-on sidelining. He didn't want friction. He wanted obedience. He saw compliance as a hurdle, not a guardrail. But here's the kicker. I wasn't mad. Not then. I was clinical, focused. You don't survive almost 2 decades in corporate without learning to spot the storm before it breaks. And Mark, he was the lightning, all flash, no grounding. Meanwhile, the systems he was optimizing were bleeding data integrity like a gut-shot deer. And our onboarding forms now auto-approved with only one sign-off. Supplier assessments were marked optional during scale mode. Our internal audit flagging tool downgraded to advisory only. He called it lean. I called it Exhibit A. Still, I said nothing. No dramatic protest, no Slack rants. I watched. I archived. I dated everything. Isolation has a funny way of sharpening your instincts. When no one's watching you, you start seeing everything. Every skipped step, every misrouted contract, every damn file that should have gone through 3 departments, but instead zipped into final approval with Mark's digital signature and a little smiling emoji. He wasn't just breaking protocol. He was manufacturing liability. But hey, he looked great doing it. Got a standing ovation after his first growth sync. The board adored him. The CEO laughed at his jokes, and I sat in my corner, unseen but unblinking, quiet, while the fuse burned down to the powder. The quarterly board meeting was held in Conference Room A, where the thermostat was always set to meat locker, and the air smelled faintly of lemon disinfectant and ambition. 12 leather chairs, 1 absurd mahogany table, $1 million view of the skyline, and me sitting in silence with my binder, invisible as always. Mark strolled in 5 minutes late, of course, sipping something in a branded Yeti and wearing that grin like he just sold moon rocks to NASA. The board loved him. He'd hit his KPIs. Project acquisition was up, onboarding speed was record-breaking, and not a single audit had landed yet. Yet. I wasn't even supposed to be in the room, but legal had asked for a quick compliance update at the tail end of the agenda, 2 minutes tops. Probably so they could check a box and feel responsible. I'd prepared a calm, clear summary. No drama, no accusations, just facts. 3 slides. Audit trail, certification gaps into new projects, policy changes that hadn't gone through governance review. I got exactly 6 words in. We've noticed a trend in... And then Mark laughed. Actually laughed. Full volume, theater quality. Cut me off. Cackle. "Oh my God, Hope," he said, shaking his head. "You're still on this?" He looked around the room like we were all at some improv show. "She's been sending these apocalypse memos for weeks. Vendor risk paper trails like it's 2012? A few board members chuckled. One of them muttered something that sounded like old school. My stomach clenched. "I mean, look," Mark continued, walking to the head of the table like it was his living room. "If Hope had her way, we'd still be faxing contracts and filing things in color-coded binders." He gestured toward me, then winked. "No offense. No offense." I sat frozen. My hands were still on the binder I'd brought, the one I'd tabbed and cross-referenced and triple-checked, the one holding every piece of evidence we'd need when this whole circus went sideways. The CEO said nothing, not a word, just looked at his phone, then moved on to the next agenda item, project onboarding metrics. He took the floor and started talking about efficiency thresholds and platform agility. He even dropped a graph. The room nodded like a damn bobblehead convention. I didn't speak again. I sat through the rest of that meeting like a statue in a power suit. My cheeks burned so hot I could barely hear over the rush in my ears. Not from shame, from rage. Rage perfectly hidden behind pressed lips and lowered eyes. The kind of rage that doesn't scream. The kind that starts building blueprints. I walked out of that room with my binder unopened and my dignity bleeding quietly under my heels. But something else walked out with me too. Something cold and final. That was the day I stopped trying to fix it from the inside. No more memos, no more polite warnings, no more giving men like Mark the benefit of the doubt while they weaponized charm and ignorance against the truth. That day, I started planning. I opened a secure folder on my personal encrypted drive, named it Protocol 0. Inside it, I began laying bricks, audit logs, project timelines, screenshot folders, change control entries. I timestamped everything. I documented who had access to what and when. I downloaded the SOP with Mark's unauthorized changes and highlighted the edit history. I backed it all up to a flash drive I kept under a fake bottom in my desk drawer, beneath a half-eaten pack of cinnamon gum. And I wrote myself a single sticky note taped under my keyboard where no one could see it. They won't listen now, but they will. The next morning, I arrived at the office 2 hours early. No makeup, no heels, just flat shoes and wore eyes. The building lights hadn't even flicked on yet. Security buzzed me in with a nod. The guy didn't know my name, but he knew my routine. I was always early. Today was strategically early. First order of business, dig quietly, thoroughly, and without triggering the tech guy's paranoia radar. I started pulling project packets, old ones, new ones, and the ones Mark's team had streamlined. I used the legacy dashboard, which was clunky but beautiful in one vital way. It tracked my data like a mother. If a form was opened, edited, or deleted, it logged it. And unlike Mark's shiny new vendor portal, it didn't lie. By noon, it had already uncovered 5 instances where onboarding dates were backdated to appear compliant and files uploaded to mimic missing documents. It wasn't sloppy. It was deliberate. I took screenshots. I printed copies, color-coded, tabbed, and indexed. I saved digital files to a high-security encrypted flash drive approved for off-net network compliance use. I signed off with a shrug. If you're backing up old SOP stuff, cool. Sure. Old SOP stuff. I also uploaded everything to a private cloud drive. Different password, different recovery email, just in case. Next came email chains. I went hunting for Mark's digital fingerprints. Turns out, his genius idea of seamless workflows came with a trail of half-baked Slack threads, and let's just fast-track this replies. Even compliance is slowing us down in a message to procurement. I screenshotted it twice, but I wasn't looking for one smoking gun. I wanted the whole armory. Each day, I arrived early, left late, ate lunch at my desk. My inbox filled with meeting invites I ignored. Mark's people had fully written me off, and that was their mistake. They thought silence meant surrender. In truth, I was building the equivalent of a quiet missile silo under their feet. I started organizing the paper trail into volumes, literally 3-inch binders with dividers, project timeline, policy changes, access logs, regulatory comparisons, executive sign-offs or lack thereof, each tabbed, labeled, and cross-referenced. I even printed hard copies of Mark's Slack messages formatted like deposition transcripts. It looked like the court scene from a John Grisham movie by the time I was done. Then, on a foggy Saturday morning, I drove to my sister's house 2 towns over and slid the binders into a sealed plastic bin in her basement, right next to a crate of Christmas decorations. She didn't ask what was inside. She just raised an eyebrow and said, "You good?" I nodded. "Not yet, but I will be." By the 3rd week, my emotional palette had boiled itself down to one clean color: precision. I didn't waste time being angry. I didn't fantasize about revenge or vindication. I didn't even imagine the look on Mark's face when the hammer dropped. I just focused on building an airtight file, not just for what he'd done, but for when he'd been warned. For every moment someone chose speed over law, optics over safety, charm over truth. I started drafting a memo, not to Mark, not to Gary, but to the CEO himself. It was 6 pages long, bullet-pointed, laced with quiet fury and statutory references. I didn't send it, not yet, because something was coming, something I could feel in my bones, the kind of shift you can't quite name, but you prepare for like a storm you smell before you see. And when it came, I would be ready, not with anger, not with noise, but with a binder and a smile. Subject: Project Integrity Concerns. To Mark McConnell, BCC, Eleanor Harper, Internal Legal Counsel. Hi, Mark. I wanted to formally document some escalating concerns regarding recent deviations from our standard third-party onboarding protocols. Specifically, I've observed patterns of project approvals lacking the required structural certifications, inconsistent audit trail entries, and instances of documentation being uploaded or amended post-contract execution. As you know, our regulatory obligations under the Federal Construction Safety Act require companies to maintain accurate and complete due diligence records prior to commencing construction. Failing to adhere to these protocols, even unintentionally, can result in violations, penalties, or worse, regulatory blacklisting. I've outlined key examples in the attached document with timestamps, affected projects, and policy citations. My recommendation remains to initiate a limited scope audit of all new projects since the policy was implemented. Let me know how you'd like to proceed. I didn't reread it, didn't pace around or overthink the tone. I just attached the file, clicked send, and quietly took a sip of coffee like I was sealing a time capsule. It wasn't a cry for help, wasn't a plea, it was a kill switch. Documented, polite, and undeniably on the record. The BCC to legal ensured it couldn't vanish. The metadata was there. The server log showed the timestamp and the document, 6 vendor examples, policy numbers, and citations. Evidence neatly packaged. He replied 27 minutes later. No greeting, no punctuation. Thanks for the bedtime story. Appreciate the passion. He stared at the screen for a full minute before I smiled. That email, more than anything else, sealed it. A department head dismissing documented compliance flags with sarcasm while legal watched from the shadows. His reply wasn't just negligent, it was radioactive. I copied his response into a separate file labeled Exhibit C, disregard of formal compliance warnings. I even included the server log that verified he opened the attachment but spent less than 10 seconds on the page. You can't fake read time, not when you know where to look. By that afternoon, I had printed the thread and slotted it into the binder under the tab marked Final Warning Sent. The ink was barely dry. Something shifted in me after that email, a kind of resignation, not defeat, not anger, just clarity. I wasn't going to fix this with another memo. I wasn't going to save the company by begging decision-makers who couldn't tell a red flag from a rose bouquet. I had built the paper trail. I had followed every protocol, and now it was just a matter of time. You ever seen a fuse burn down in slow motion? That's what it felt like. The silence after that email was louder than a boardroom. No follow-up, no questions, just another Friday all-hands where Mark shouted, "Let's crush Q3!" Offered bonuses for anyone who onboarded 5 projects by month's end. No mention of vetting, no mention of risk. So I waited, the binder growing heavier, my inbox growing quieter. And somewhere out there, in the land of federal oversight, I prayed for one curious regulator to look a little too closely, because when they did, I'd be holding a flashlight, a receipt, and a map to the bodies. The envelope was cream-colored, thick paper, with a raised seal in the top left corner. It landed on the CEO's desk via overnight courier. Not email, not Slack, not some cheery intern. Physical, serious, the kind of thing you don't just skim between Zoom calls. I didn't see it arrive, but I heard about it within hours because panic spreads faster than memos. The Federal Office of Construction Safety had sent an official request. Please provide documentation outlining third-party project protocols as revised under Policy Rev 7.2 with examples of application to projects 341 through 350. 10 projects, all of them flagged in my binder. All of them approved under Mark's streamlining initiative. All of them missing at least one legally required certification. Mark called it a routine inquiry in the Monday leadership meeting. Just a checkbox thing, he said, sipping his canned cold brew. They send these out all the time. We'll respond, show our growth metrics, and they'll move on. No one looked convinced. The CEO raised an eyebrow. Do we have all the requested documentation ready? Almost there, Mark replied a little too quickly. I just need to aggregate a few files. Aggregate, which was code for, I'm scrambling like a raccoon in a dumpster fire. I said nothing, just sat at the edge of the room, technically there to provide supporting materials if needed. I opened a yellow notepad and wrote 2 things: the date and the name of the regulator printed on the letterhead. Then I just waited. For the next 2 days, Mark buried himself in conference calls. I saw his assistant running between departments with that panicked toddler energy, the kind that only shows up when someone's trying to build documents that should already exist. Gary pinged me in Slack once. Hey, any idea where the original project approval docs are stored for the inquiry batch? I typed, then deleted, then retyped, then finally sent. They should be in the compliance archive, assuming the new workflows were followed. I attached no files, offered no rescue line. If Mark wanted to play captain, he could go down with the ship he built. By Wednesday, legal was hovering. I passed Eleanor, our internal counsel, in the break room. She was gripping a file folder like it owed her child support. Her eyes flicked up to me. You didn't happen to archive any of the project data before the policy changes, did you? I sipped my coffee. I archive everything. She nodded, didn't smile, didn't ask for access. Just walked. The tension in the office shifted. You could feel it like the air before a thunderstorm. People started using headphones at their desks, not for music, but to avoid eye contact. Mark got snippy in stand-ups, called someone overcautious for asking about compliance checkboxes. I caught him whispering in a stairwell to someone in procurement. He was asking if the missing forms could be reconstructed if we know what they should have said. You ever seen a man try to forge time? It's not graceful. Then Thursday morning, the CEO's assistant scheduled a full exec briefing. Everyone was to attend. No optional RSVPs. No vague swing by if you can. It was booked under one word: regulator. That's when I knew the trap was live. Not set. Live. The regulator had touched the wire. Mark was now the only thing standing between inquiry and investigation. And I sat at my desk, binder in my lap, tabs perfectly aligned, each one circled in red, every warning preserved, every timestamp verifiable, every ignored memo about to become a monument. I didn't smile, didn't rehearse. I just waited for the question I knew was coming. The one Mark couldn't answer. The one that would burn through his buzzwords like acid. And when it came, I'd be ready. No panic, no performance, just paper and precision. The conference room was packed wall to wall with silence. Phones face down, laptops open but untouched. No one sipping coffee, no one adjusting their ties or crossing their legs with the usual fidgety executive flair. Just stillness, like the air knew what was coming before we did. The TV on the far wall flickered to life. A Zoom window opened to reveal a woman with steel gray hair, thin-rimmed glasses, and the kind of unblinking stare you get when your entire career is built on spotting fraud at 20 paces. Her name was David Hennon, Senior Compliance Investigator, Federal Office of Construction Safety. Her voice was calm, clipped, and devastating. "Thank you for having me," she began. "I'll keep this brief. We're following up on our previous request regarding third-party project documentation. We'd just like to confirm a few items." Mark leaned forward, all charm and synthetic confidence. "Of course, David. Happy to help." She didn't smile. "Let's start with Project 347, she said, reading directly from her notes. "Can you provide documentation of their structural certification at the time of due diligence?" Mark froze. It wasn't obvious at first. To most of the room, it probably looked like he was just being thoughtful, calculating his words, maybe mentally scanning a file directory. But I saw it. The twitch in his jaw, the half-breath that caught in his throat, the fingers tapping the side of his Yeti cup faster now. "Well," he said, dragging out the word like it might grow a lifeline if he gave it enough room. "Project 347 was part of our fast-track design acceleration pilot, so documentation may have been finalized post-engagement, but within the acceptable risk parameters outlined in—" David cut him off politely, surgically. "Just to clarify, is there or is there not a structural certification on file dated prior to due diligence?" Mark opened his mouth, closed it, looked down at the tablet in front of him, swiped again. Silence. The board members started shifting, subtle movements. One cleared his throat. Another scribbled something in a notebook they hadn't touched until now. The CEO's eyes were locked on Mark like he just watched someone fart during a funeral. I sat still, stone-faced, not blinking, because the answer was no. The document didn't exist. Not digitally, not physically, not in any shared drive or Slack thread or secret subfolder labeled final, really final project docs, because Mark had skipped it, overruled it, called it bureaucratic friction, and waved it away like it was optional fine print. David waited exactly 6 seconds. Then she asked again, "Mr. McConnell, yes or no?" Mark inhaled. "At this time, I don't have that document readily accessible." "Not readily accessible," she repeated, typing something. "Understood." That was when it happened. That microscopic shift in the power dynamic, the kind you can feel in your bones before anyone says it out loud. The CEO turned in his chair just slightly toward me. I didn't move, didn't offer help. I wasn't going to save him. I wasn't going to break the silence. My job had been done 6 weeks ago when I hit send on that email, attached the memo, archived everything like a mortician preparing for a wake no one believed was coming. Mark cleared his throat. "Look, we have robust protocols. There may have been transitional hiccups during the rollout." David raised a single eyebrow. "You implemented a new policy revision that allowed for project due diligence prior to structural documentation?" Well, it was an efficiency initiative, so—" "That's a yes." He froze again. The silence in the room was now thick enough to chew. Somewhere near the door, someone's phone vibrated quietly. No one dared check it. The board was watching now. Really watching. Not nodding along, not chuckling at his buzzwords. Just staring and seeing for the first time that there was no depth beneath Mark's shine. just a shallow pool of gloss and ego now draining fast under federal scrutiny. The trap had sprung, but it wasn't loud. It didn't snap like a bear trap in a cartoon. It hissed, slow, precise, inescapable. I sat there, binder closed in my lap, waiting for the moment they'd finally ask the only question that mattered, the one that would flip the whole room on its axis. But that came next. For a moment, no one spoke. Not Mark, not the board, not even David, who just sat there on the screen like a marble bust with a federal badge. The hum of the AC kicked on loud in the vacuum Mark had created with his incompetence and stammering. The CEO leaned back in his chair, slowly folded his hands, tapped his thumbs together like he was kneading invisible dough made of disappointment. He didn't speak for a long time, just stared straight ahead, not even at Mark, more like through him. Then he turned, not dramatically, not with flair, just a smooth pivot of the neck like he'd finally reached the next name on his mental checklist. "Hope," he said, voice calm, clipped. "Do you have the documentation?" The entire room shifted. Dozens of heads snapped toward me. The woman who hadn't spoken in 3 weeks of meetings. The ghost in the machine. The compliance statue they'd left in the corner and forgotten. I didn't say a word. I simply reached into my bag and pulled out the binder, the one with the red tab labeled Project 347, the one I'd backed up 5 different ways and stored in 2 separate zip codes. I placed it on the table, clean, crisp, and factual in that way that only truth can be. The CEO looked at it. I slid it forward. "Page 14, sir." He opened it, glanced down. 1 breath in, 1 breath out. The signatures, the missing certification, the timestamp, the flagged email chain, my original memo, dated, delivered, and ignored. He didn't ask another question. He didn't look at Mark. He didn't look at the board. He just closed the binder, turned his gaze back to the screen, and said flatly to David, "I'll be sending you a full documentation packet, courtesy of Miss Carlton. Apologies for the confusion." David nodded once, expression unchanged. "Appreciated." Then the CEO turned to Mark. "Clean out your office." That was it. Not a raised voice. Not a dramatic outburst. No righteous monologue about integrity or ethics or fiduciary duty. Just the dull, surgical sound of a career being terminated in real time. Mark blinked like he hadn't understood the words. I think there's been a... You're fired," the CEO repeated, still not raising his voice. By now, a security badge holder appeared at the doorway. A man in a suit. Quiet. Professional. Mark looked around like someone might stand up for him. The board members looked at their notes. One took a sip of water. Another reached for a pen that didn't need picking up. No one moved. No one saved him. As Mark stood, slow, clinical, I caught one last glimpse of his face. It wasn't rage. It wasn't even embarrassment. It was confusion. Like he still believed his charm would override reality. Like he couldn't quite compute that the same room that once laughed at his jokes was now watching him vanish like a ghost no one liked. He left without another word. David gave the briefest of nods and disconnected. The screen blinked black. The meeting, such as it was, dissolved in an awkward fog. No one really knew what to do next. So they sat there, quiet, shifting in their chairs, realizing what had just happened. I didn't smile. I didn't gloat. I just sat still. Binder back in my lap. Tabs pristine. Mission complete. For the first time in months, no one was talking over me. No one was streamlining the truth. And the only sound in the room was the soft, glorious echo of Mark's chair rolling away for the last time. It was 3 days later, early morning. Elevator ride, just me, the CEO, and the faint hum of fluorescent lights overhead. We hadn't spoken since the meeting. He hadn't needed to. Mark was gone. The regulator had been sent the binder. Legal confirmed no further investigation pending. We stood side by side in silence, floor numbers blinking past like Morse code. As we reached the executive level, he didn't look at me, just said, soft, almost tired. "Thank you." 2 words, no speech or handshake, just that. Like a breath he'd been holding finally let out. I nodded. "You're welcome, sir." He stepped off. The doors closed. That was it. Later that afternoon, an email arrived from HR. Subject line, RO transition details effective immediately. No fanfare, no big announcement, but my login now opened new dashboards. I had approval access Mark used to wield like a child with scissors. My nameplate was swapped out on the 3rd floor. No one said the word promotion, but my office now had a window. The board didn't apologize. Of course not. They congratulated me with their silence, leaned forward during briefings, read every slide I presented, and didn't interrupt once. That was enough. I didn't throw a party, didn't update my LinkedIn, just moved in slow and steady, box by box, binder by binder. And when I unpacked the last of my things, I hung one item dead center on the back wall. A framed printout of the original memo, the one I sent to Mark, the one he replied to with thanks for the bedtime story. It was dated, titled, highlighted, a monument to quiet preparation. A reminder for them, for me, for whoever sat in that chair next, that integrity isn't optional. That warnings ignored don't evaporate. They calcify, they wait, and they speak when it counts. I sat at my desk, leaned back, binder in reach, systems running clean, no fireworks, no applause, just order. And the peace of knowing they finally heard the voice I never had to raise.